All right, today we're diving into a really provocative piece of writing. The core argument that the unspoken deal between generations in America isn't just a little strained, it's been totally shattered. So, let's break it down.
And this is the very first line of the article we're looking at. I mean, wow, it's a real gut punch, right? This isn't some gentle critique, it's a full-on accusation. The author is basically saying the generational crisis we're seeing is a self-inflicted wound, caused by the very people who are now shocked by the outcome.
Okay, so let's get into it. What exactly is this broken promise the author is talking about? We're going to dig into the central idea that pretty much holds their entire argument together.
So, here's the main charge, according to the article. The generation that gave us Woodstock and fought for civil rights. Well, the author claims they ended up building a system that's now locking their own kids out of the very stability and success they managed to achieve. A huge irony, right?
Okay, so to really get what they're saying, you have to understand this idea of a generational contract. It's basically an unspoken deal in society, right? The younger generation takes care of the older one with the expectation that when their time comes, they'll get the same support. But the whole point of this article is that that deal, it's completely off the table now.
All right, so now we're going to dig into the economic side of things. Because according to this piece, this isn't just some philosophical debate. No, it's rooted in cold, hard cash or the lack of it.
And you can really see the disconnect the author is talking about here. On one side, you've got that classic boomer advice, you know? Just have a firm handshake, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But on the other side, the article paints this picture of what it calls the millennial reality, crushing student debt, 12-hour shifts, a totally different world. The author's point is simple. The old playbook just doesn't work anymore.
And the article puts a really stark number on this struggle. $90,000. That's for a 20% down payment on a pretty average home. When you see a number like that, the piece argues, homeownership stops feeling like the American dream and starts feeling more like an impossible wall you can't climb.
Then the author turns to the job market. They pull this data from the St. Louis Fed, which shows that a huge chunk, 88%, of new jobs created since 2020 went to immigrants. Now, for the author, this isn't just a random statistic. They use it to argue that specific economic policies have completely changed the labor market, and they claim this has a direct negative impact on wages and job opportunities for native-born workers.
But, you know, this isn't just about money or getting a job. The author argues that the divide goes way deeper. It's cultural, it's personal, and all that economic stress, it morphs into this really deep feeling of being totally alienated. And the article uses this really vivid story to paint a picture of this divide. So you've got a father freaking out about his 401k, texting his son and screaming in all caps about politics. Meanwhile, the son is just trying to make it through another brutal shift at his job. Two completely different worlds. And here you can see those two worlds side by side. You've got the father's life, the Mercedes, the nice house in an HOA community worrying about his investments, and then you have the son's world, a small one-bedroom apartment, those 12-hour shifts, being the only English speaker at his job. The author's point is crystal clear. They're not just living different lives, they're on completely different planets. And according to the source, that feeling of being on different planets isn't just about this one father and son. The author claims this disconnect is happening everywhere. You see it with grandparents who, the article says, don't want anything to do with their grandkids. You see it in churches that feel totally out of touch. And you see it in what the author calls a boomer ethos that puts a corporate job way ahead of family.
Okay, so after laying out all these personal stories and economic problems, the argument takes a big turn. The author kind of zooms out. It stops being about just one generation's fault and starts pointing the finger at the entire system.
And to make this point, the author throws out a challenge. They show this picture of a completely abandoned street, and they ask a simple question. Where do you think this is? The whole idea is that you can't really tell for sure, and that's exactly the problem.
So it turns out the photo was taken in Cleveland. But as the author points out, does it really matter? It could have been Detroit, it could have been Baltimore, Pittsburgh, you could name dozens of other cities. And the fact that this kind of decay looks so familiar, the article argues, is a really bad sign for the whole system.
And all of this leads to the author's final, pretty shocking verdict. After all is said and done, the blame isn't just on a generation or a policy. It's on the entire economic system itself. The article comes right out and says it. The whole idea of capitalism needs to be thrown out.
Okay, so if the diagnosis is that the entire system is broken,
What's the prescription? Well, the article doesn't just leave it a criticism. It finishes by proposing some pretty radical solutions.
And here's what the author lays out as a fix. First, they say to rebuild culture and community using nationalism. Second, to create new unions based on, and I'm quoting here, ethnos and people. Third, to encourage a sense of local pride and even tribalism. And finally, to destroy corporations and, in the author's own words, to make immigrants uncomfortable. So in the end, what we've looked at is one very raw, very angry perspective on a society that the author believes is fundamentally broken. It's not a piece with easy answers. It's really just one stark diagnosis that leaves us all with a pretty heavy question. When people completely lose faith in a system, what happens next?